Dude, this is a side note, but when I was in college, I used to do kind of like there were times where I would do reverse plagiarism like that, where I needed like quotes or something, and I would make up a quote myself, right? Like, and then I would just like attribute it to somebody like famous just to fill. And it was my quote, but I'm not gonna quote myself. But yeah, it's they never
Making the
even
fear, but
checked
fear
it.
itself. Bijoy Samuel.
Jeez.
Welcome back to the season finale of the Restoring Our City podcast. I can't believe we have gone through yet another season, and this one was exciting, guys. I'm again joined with my co-hosts Bijoy and Jobin. So how do you guys feel? You know, we're coming at 15 episodes in 16 weeks. How do you guys feel about this?
It's a lot, but I'm actually, you look back on it, I was like, I'm really surprised that we got as much done as we did. I mean, literally we're recording every single week for a while, and sometimes like twice a week. So yeah, I guess once you get that rhythm going,
Hard to stop.
it's hard to
Can't stop,
stop.
won't
Yeah.
stop. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of work, but man, it's like there's so much going on in the world, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to pipe in on some of these things. But real fun season.
Yeah, real fun season. And, toward the end of this episode, we're going to talk about what we have coming up next. But, reflecting back on this current season, I think a phrase that you might have heard in our intro or outro episodes is we want to have candid conversations on today's topic. But the key word being candid conversations. Now, guys, there was something out in the news recently about a platform which people have conversations on called Twitter. I don't know if you guys have heard about it or if you've lived under a rock for the last 20 years, but Twitter apparently is trying to be bought out by none other than Elon Musk, who is this huge proponent of free speech to the point of anyone can say anything. So just first off the bat, how do you guys feel about that?
I mean, how rich are you that you could just literally wake up one morning and be like, I am buying your social media site, and buying everybody else out? Like it's crazy, man, that he has just the power to do that.
I saw one of the comments was some like he criticized something, and then somebody responded to it saying, "You should just buy Twitter." And then he goes ahead and he does it. Well, at least puts an offer out. Well, I hope he cleans it up, because I've gotten, I'm on Twitter and I put, comments criticizing like the Houston Astros for cheating. And there's one time I did that and I got bamboozled. It was people were like coming at me left and right. So I'm like, man, Elon Musk, clean this up. I don't want to get any death threats from baseball fans.
Right. And Elon Musk, if you're hearing this, I've been canceled on Twitter. For those of you that don't know, Mill put out something about Stephanie and myself, and man, I got some real backlash on that. But that being said, when thinking about it, I think sometimes from the left side, you'll hear that the political right side uses Twitter to stir up controversies and falsehoods. And even when we think about what occurred on January 6th with President Trump and the use of Twitter to do that, there's a lot of criticism on the dangers of using a platform like this to end up with some evil ends. And on the flip side, I think a lot from the political right side, you'll see a lot of criticism against the left for using Twitter to really censor ideas and opinions. For example, I think more recently we had Joe Rogan that literally called it out and said, if I was to say at the beginning that masks are not as effective as you're saying, Twitter would have flagged it and said, like, this is not correct. Later on, science proves that opinion is correct. A little bit further than that, when the vaccines came out again, he said, if we were to say that you can still spread the COVID disease even if you get the vaccine, you would have been flagged for reporting falsehoods on Twitter. But lo and behold, those opinions are correct. So, I guess this leads to a question, guys, of what is the balance between, saying something controversial and potentially offensive versus, really kind of censoring ourselves so that we're not, spreading those kind of things to stir people up. Should we have open platforms like this, or do you agree that there has to be some sort of sort of restraint or censorship in order to have a functioning dialogue.
Dude, I mean, it's heavy, man, because if the idea of free speech, right, at its fundamental level is that you have the ability to say and talk about whatever you want. And I was telling you guys this before, but in other countries, right, you can't talk about the government. You can't say anything about the religion. It is so strict. Like, you get in trouble. There's consequences for saying anything negative about certain topics, right? In this country, someone could stand outside the White House and, hurl insults at the president of the United States, and like, it's okay because under the guise of free speech,
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really interesting question. Like, just because we have the ability to say whatever we want, should we, is number one, I guess. But
yeah, I was reading this really interesting article kind of on that point, Bejoy, from the Gospel Coalition. It had this quote. It says, "In order to secure our moral right to speak truth, we generally need to defend a legal right that includes a right to speak falsehood." So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, hey, if you really want to fight for this, then that might include some of the bad too, right? Like, for all the good that we want to share publicly, that's going to automatically include some of these, lies and falsehoods and disinformation or whatever it is. And so I don't know. I feel like it's like a weird argument to talk about it from a legal perspective and a moral perspective. And then how do we actually approach it as Christians? Like, we have to be very prudent in the words that we choose to say, right?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with both of those opinions. And, just for myself, when I think about that concept, I think you're right, Job, and I would agree with that you have to defend the ability to speak falsehoods. I think, sometimes we would hope as a society that people will critically think through issues before supporting things that are said or disavowing things that are said. I think, nowadays we're so worried about quote unquote disinformation getting out there and how quickly it can spread. But I think, again, it brings us back to the need for candid conversations to critically think and really parse through some of these things. And I do agree. I think, at the end of the day, we need to have platforms that are open so that you can be offended, right? Like, I need to see some things that might offend me, and that should be okay from some perspectives. And I think that helps me in developing my own thoughts on a particular issue. I think nowadays, and you guys could chime in on this too, we try to restrain speech against things that may offend people. Do you think that's a smart idea, or would you say it's smart in the sense that if we do offend enough people, you just stir up potential things that, like riots and protests and things that could be destructive? Or do you think that we should restrain and censor things that might be offensive so that we don't end up with chaos, essentially? What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? I think it's partly highlighting those negative things, and we amplify that negative noise. And the reason I'm thinking about this is actually the other day, whenever we publish this, there's a basketball game where Kyrie Irving and the Nets were playing against the Celtics, and the Boston fans were giving it to him, and he flipped them off, and he was like making fun of them. And then I watched the post game with like Inside the NBA with Charles Barkley and Shaq and all those guys, and they're like, man up. If you play in like Boston, Philly, those fans are going to give it to you. It's like 5% of the fans. Like 95% of the fans are not going to say anything. What's the 5%? And they're always going to do it. So just ignore it. Why are we highlighting that? Just go play ball. And I was like, that's a good point, actually, right? If we keep amplifying one or two people out of a crowd of thousands, you're going to think that that's the story, and it's really not, right? But that shouldn't stop the fans from coming in and sharing a sign or like yelling insults at their players, maybe within reason, right? But I don't think you censor it. I think you just stop calling attention to it.
Mm-hmm. I also think that, everybody uses media and the things they find online to support their like thoughts and viewpoints, right? So, Jobin, if you posted something and I was like, oh, that's fake news, that's not even true, he's just like spreading lies, and then I go in there and I look up some stuff online, and then I post a rebuttal to say that's not true because this is what's really going on, then someone's going to be like, where did you get that news from? That's fake news. So it's like, where's our source? Where's anybody's true source of truth coming from? Like, we're all going to pull from different parts of the internet and whatever we read just to support our side of it. And I think that's where the free speech starts to get like out of hand, is because where's our source really,
Yeah, no, that's such a great point, right? Like, you can find something for anything to support whatever you want. That's a great point.
Have you guys seen Ball Sack Sports on Twitter?
No,
It's like
what?
There's a Twitter account that's called Ball Sack Sports. It's kind of a raunchy name, right? But they made fake tweets and they would put it out there. And they literally made a tweet that said, here, put a picture of an athlete and then put a quote underneath it and attribute it to anybody, and people will believe you. And of course, Stephen A. Smith goes on ESPN and he uses one of their quotes as like actual news.
Gosh.
It's just like, wow, people can run with anything. And it's like a perfect example. It's just like, it's a joke, a parody account, but people listen to it because they see a fancy graphic and an athlete's picture and a quote, and that's all it takes.
Dude, this is a side note, but when I was in college, I used to do kind of like, there were times where I would do reverse plagiarism like that, where I needed like quotes or something, and I would make up a quote myself, right? Like, and then I would just like attribute it to somebody like famous just to fill. And it was my quote, but I'm not gonna quote myself. But yeah, they never even checked
fear itself. BitJoy Samuel.
If we've learned one thing, is you can't get a good idea out in 340 or whatever many characters that there are there. So maybe Twitter isn't the best medium to use if you're going to be doing some research here. But on that topic of offense, I think, just like you said, maybe you get offended and find different information, or shoot, you just make up your own information like that. But I think, I was listening to, I can't recall who it was, but they said, with this idea of we're not going to speak if it offends someone, it completely goes against even like things within like a marriage. Think about it. If you're going to have a actual dialogue on something that's uncomfortable, yeah, you're going to have to risk being offended and being offensive to your wife or your husband. But the point is, you have to risk that in order to have a substantive conversation, right? Like, we have to, in some senses, be like, hey, I might be offended by this conversation, but at the end, hopefully this is going to strengthen either my position or help me grow as a person. And so, just with that entire thing, maybe we're having conversations, but we have to risk it not being a safe environment for us if we need to grow. And that's just my 2 cents on it. I think that's the entire point for me too, with candid conversations.
I'm never offensive to my wife. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't agree with that at all. No, but you're right. You have to be candid, right? We have to be, the truth hurts sometimes. And if we kind of guard it way too much, then you're not really saying anything. And I think even with this podcast, right? Like, we've gotten some feedback from a lot of people, and some people are like, hey, what about this perspective? What about this? And I remember I got a message from somebody asking about cancel culture and why we don't talk about this at church and some of these kind of things. It's like, yeah, because sometimes it's hurtful, and it's also controversial to bring up some of these things. So we definitely need that balance to not be guarded, but not be purposefully offensive in order to hurt someone, right? I think there's a line there.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody, the problem is that everyone's offended by something all the time, right? Like, I know there are examples where I'm like, really? Like, someone, especially with movies, right? Or I saw one where it was like an Asian movie, and like the cast was entirely Asian, and then someone responded, this lead character wasn't Asian enough. Like, he was like mixed or something. Yeah, like, it was just something so stupid. And I'm like, it was like, they basically made a movie with all Asian people, and there was somebody out in the world that was like, that person's not Asian enough, And so this is the world we live in. We talk about this all the time. Like, everybody's just offended all the time by every little thing. And if we have to walk on eggshells every time we want to have some kind of candid conversation, like, we're never gonna progress as a society we're never going to learn other people's perspectives. Like it's always just going to be everyone internalizing like everything, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah, or you end up with a situation where again, like the entire country could become just an echo chamber, and rather than learning, we end up with indoctrinating, right? A certain viewpoint that's the least offensive viewpoint to the most amount of people, and I think that's a scary proposition. Even for us as Christians, I think, you know, it's funny. I think one of the verses that stood out for me from Easter is the gospel is foolishness for those that don't believe, but for those that you know, do believe, it is the power and like the saving work of God. So really thinking about that in some senses, like, yeah, I think we're gonna risk being offended and offensive if we do kind of stand out for our faith, which leads, I guess, to another question with this entire Twitter sort of a story is, I think a lot of people are afraid because Elon Musk is going to come up and shake the game. But a lot of people are also hopeful because they think that only a few powerful people are only pushing one side of narratives within the country. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that's actually true, that, you know, Twitter is, you know, really just pushing one side, or is Twitter being cautious in the sense that they want to protect us from, you know, finding out some dumb things and misinformation, just like we were talking about?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, really a crazy situation when you have a platform like that where you can really dictate what is trending and what's the popular topics. And, you know, if you have something that isn't trending, that should be trending, and that is actually, you know, a really big story, but you don't hear about it, then that's a problem. And when you have people who can control that and suppress information, then, you know, that could be very, very dangerous, right? And if he goes about it with the right intentions and really opens it up where anybody can say anything and you're not really like limiting it, I think it could be a really good thing. It would be really interesting to see if the slant of the articles that you read start to change, right? And that you start to not see just one side of the story anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. I'm curious to see how it goes. I think I might be a little bit more skeptical to say that it might not be a great thing. I think, you know, people that have, and I think this kind of comes back to our candid conversation point, right? Like, I think sometimes we have to think about what lens do we use to analyze the world and life. And I think if we don't have a lens, but we're just going to take popular opinion to be our lens, then a place like Twitter could cause you to have a garbage worldview. There's no other way to put that, right? But if you're going to go on a platform like Twitter to have some intelligent like searching and debates and stuff, I think it can be a good thing. I just think generally as a country and as a society and as even like as a generation, we some dumb people, man. So I think we need to have some good substantive convos with one another. So hopefully you can find that. But I think now let's do some hopes in for the future, right? Like, where are we going with this? What are we looking forward to? So just, you know, with this season ending and with a new season coming at some point ahead, what are you guys looking forward to?
Is that a question for us or for our listeners?
Yeah, you know what? I guess our listeners could come into a brainstorming session we're having live right now. It's a conversation with all of us.
Send us your mail.
Enjoy. Exactly. You know, you guys could jump in on the conversation too. Ask us anything. RestoringOurCity.org. So definitely, yeah. What are you guys looking forward to, and what do you think we should be talking about?
Well, the one thing that we've all been talking about, which even resonates with our listeners, is the whole idea of mental health, right? And I think we know this past season that is a topic that people are interested in hearing. And I think we've just kind of been not quite ready to address it. And not because of a fear of being candid about any of it. It's just that kind of stuff gets like, we got to be really careful about how we approach it and who we have kind of same thing, right? Like, where are we getting our information from too, you know? So, but I do think, like we talked about before, that might be the topic that we need to start kind of maybe doing a series on, you know. It's pretty taboo in our culture, in our community for sure, but yet it's very, very prevalent in a lot of different ways, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's like, it's something that has been talked about, and you've seen seminars and things like that. That I get this little guy. I don't know if you can hear him. He's just maybe parenting. Like, maybe parenting well. 101.
Parenting, yeah. There you go.
How do I stop that? No, from a mental health standpoint, I think there are so many topics that people have spoken about, but also like, how do we actually address some of those things that maybe are not at the forefront, right? And we want to get some experts who are, well trained and well versed in some of these topics as well. So I think it's kind of a balanced approach about both of those things.
Yeah. And you know what? Just on that point, if you know an expert that you think would be great to contribute on a mental health related topic, definitely either DM us, go to the Restoring Our City website, hit the Ask Us Anything link, just respond to us. We want to have a conversation with you, and we definitely want to highlight people within our community that are experts on topics relating to mental health. And we want to do this series justice, and we can't do it without you. So this is a call for your help, your support, and your engagement here. So definitely hit us up.
Yeah, and on that too, if you are someone that has gone through that or is going through that and you're comfortable, that's the beauty of these podcasts, right? Like, do we have a forum here for like very honest, open conversations to the level that people are comfortable, So if this is a platform that you feel like you're comfortable sharing your story, you just never know who you're going to be able to impact through that, So that just, I think we just throw that out there too, like there might be people that are be willing to share.
I think this is coming close to the end of this episode, but also the end of a season. We are going to take a little bit of a hiatus. This was a big stretch of 15 episodes in 16 weeks. Definitely know that we are not disengaged. You can always hit us up on Instagram, go to the website, restoringourcity.org, or just make contact with any one of us, Bejoy, Job, and myself. We would love to hear from you and engage with you. So guys, congrats on wrapping up the season, and I can't wait for the next one.
Season 5, here we come.
Season 5, let's go.
Let's do it.
Live from Mexico.
We do this like remote location, like at a resort.
Preferably.
Yeah,
traveling podcast.
Right.
Usually with TV shows too, after about season 6 or 7, it starts going downhill. So you know what? We're going to have at least a great season 5, but after that,
somebody's going to die. So we're going to kill somebody off, right?
No promises, yeah. All right, guys.
All right, guys, yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode. Check us out at restoringourcity.org, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify to get the latest content. The Restoring Our City podcast is hosted by Jobin Verghese, Jeswin Thomas, and Bejoy Samuel. Graphics by Claire Skelly, Alexander Skowalski, and Teresa Studley. Our music is Jazzy Abstract Beat by Coma Media from Pixabay. Thanks again for listening.